Mini episode 78 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Outside the Box Score, your home on the web for entertaining sports columns and videos. Follow them on the web at OutsideTheBoxScore.blogspot.com.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 78. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here, and we've got a very, very tremendous guest coming up momentarily. We're going to be bringing on our guest here on the program. And it's always a pleasure whenever we can do this. I don't remember if I don't think we've done a specifically musically oriented segment since we were fortunate enough to have our sit down with Steve Perry back in November. So it's always fun to get to talk music on this show. And again, as I said previously, the FDH Lounge senior producer Steve Servillo has been putting this over to me tremendously and saying how great of a segment that this is going to be with this gentleman, and I have no doubt about that whatsoever. He is, of course, the editorial director of Billboard magazine. It's a pleasure to welcome to the FDH Lounge Bill Werde. Bill, welcome to the program, sir. Good to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, and thank you for that. Thank you for that very kind introduction. No pressure on me, right?
Yeah, no pressure at all. Yeah, I'm sure it is going to be just fine. As I say that very cheerily, I guess I'll abruptly and awkwardly segue to a sad note here. The passing of Don Cornelius, quite a influential figure on the musical scene. Not the first nor the last really to do this, but one of the key figures in terms of mainstreaming R&B music to America. So I'd just like to start with that. Any thoughts that you have on the man's legacy?
Well, I mean, we did a piece we did a full-page obit in Billboard magazine this week, and that's something that we don't often do. Sadly, and I say this with no cynicism, there's people who've had important careers and played an important part in the music business or in music that are regularly passing, and so we tend to be very, very judicial in how we blow up certain ones. But with Don, this guy blazed so many trails. I think not only, as you properly know, did he mainstream R&B and soul music. I mean, I'm a personal witness to that, right? Like I was a little kid growing up in Delaware, and I'm 38 years old. To give you a little bit of historical context, I was a little kid growing up in Delaware in the days when cable TV was sort of just hitting my neighborhood, and Soul Train and Friday Night Videos on NBC were like the only real ways I could get to music on TV. And Friday Night Videos on MTV happened way too late, but Soul Train, I could find reruns of that during the day sometimes on some of the UHF channels. And I remember, I'd watch it. I was like a moth to the flame. And so, I just think he just brought so much of this great R&B music, but also just like the notion of seeing black people in different roles to white America was really important on a lot of different levels. I mean, we touch on that in our piece. But it's interesting. I think one of the things that he doesn't receive as much credit for is actually bringing sort of white artists to Black America. You had artists like David Bowie, famously, who would play Soul Train, who wanted to play Soul Train, because they kind of knew that Don's audience was where it was at. So it's a sad moment. Obviously he kind of stepped away from the show and wasn't playing the same role that he once did, but his legacy and the longevity of what he did was just kind of stunning. And if you like, skimming through our piece, it's like there really isn't almost anyone in the music business, period, but certainly in the R&B and hip hop business that doesn't owe an enormous debt to Don, and that's really what comes through again and again in the obituary that we ran.
Absolutely, very unshakable legacy, and excellent point too, as you said about the white artists playing the show, also trying to reach out the other way. That's a great, very overlooked point. It's very interesting to me. You wrote a column recently for Billboard explaining a change in editorial policy as far as how things were going to be counted on the charts, and I understand that this is something that has to be done over a period of time as technology changes and circumstances change. Along similar lines, it's no exaggeration to say this is something that I've waited about 20 years to ask somebody who would have a good idea on this, and based on what you had said.
I'm terrified of what you're about to ask.
But you and I are contemporaries, actually, Bill. So you were growing up about the same time I was.
And where did you grow up?
The Midwest, Ohio, actually. I was actually fortunate enough to get to listen to WMMS back in the day, and did quite often. So
that was the Buzzard, right?
Yes. Legendary station here that broke Rush and Springsteen, and really the template, I think, for a lot of the other great rock stations of the Midwest.
Rock station, no doubt.
Past the point in time when they were in their prime, 1991. I've always wondered this. When you guys switched, and I know you weren't there at the time, obviously, but when SoundScan came in with the implementation of it that year, and it was sort of the end of the wild, wild west as far as how these things get reported, that's the year, of course, Garth Brooks broke big. It's probably best known for the year that Nirvana really broke big. You had some of the 80s elements kind of falling away a little bit. And I'm just curious for your opinion on this. I've always wondered, is it a thing where it was merely reflecting the trends that were getting ready to pop, or do you think SoundScan was really something that should be considered part of the story at that time, that maybe that there were styles out there that were more popular than we knew, and it took this reporting system to bring it to the fore? I've just always wondered if it's a coincidence.
There's no question about that. I'm happy to speak to that. Unquestionably, it's the latter scenario. Unquestionably, SoundScan sort of pulled back the curtain and let people see what was actually happening in America when it came to musical purchases, as opposed to what the sort of cognoscenti, and Billboard was part of that, believed was happening in America. And so, I almost liken it to Galileo, right? Was a heretic because he said the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. I mean, it was literally that kind of a sea change. We all went to bed one night, and now I'm repeating history, right? I was graduating high school in 1991 and had no inkling that any of this was happening, but it's literally as if the world, or at least the world that cared about the music business, went to bed one day believing that hair metal ballads and rock and roll and basically that, and maybe some R&B and some pop was pretty much what the sun rose and set to. And then the next day we all woke up and it turned out that it was country music and hip hop and the stuff that really was happening out there. And so you can get a sense. I mean, the music business has occasionally earned its reputation as one that doesn't necessarily embrace change. And I think that was a moment where, looking back, there were plenty of people who did want SoundScan to come into existence, but there were also plenty of people who wanted to protect the status quo as it was. And anyway, it couldn't have been more clear, though. I mean, the Billboard charts were, I think, dramatically underrepresenting country music, underrepresenting hip-hop, and SoundScan set that all straight pretty quickly.
Well, that's a tremendous answer. I know there's a lot of other people that have always wondered that as well. I was talking to one of the guys in our crew about this the other day, Nate Noy, who's a guy who actually grew up in Appalachia, and he said, and he's about our age also, he said growing up, there were a lot of kids in high school that were listening to Garth Brooks before 91. And I said, really? I had never heard of him before then. So it just goes to show you that I guess he was pretty big in certain parts of the country that, were never really reflected before SoundScan, it seems like.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, now today we find ourselves in another situation where, SoundScan is largely tracking album sales and single sales, and that doesn't always tell the full story anymore.
Right, and you had written that column recently about that and about having to, once again, and I guess it's just a continuing process over time, the continuum just flows along, how you have to redefine how these things are set up on the charts there, and it was a very good explanation I thought you gave in terms of why this redefinition was necessary.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, anyone who wants to see that, I mean, I think you can probably Google my name and Billboard.biz, which is our business site, and find that pretty easily.
Yeah, it was very interesting to me. In terms of the Super Bowl just gone by here, and some of the musical aspects to that, very curious. Again, I was following your thoughts on this on Twitter, and I know you thought that Madonna gave a very good halftime show here. I'm curious to draw. Well, I guess I'll just start on that because I have a subsequent question for you. But I'll draw you out on that first, on your thoughts on the spectacle itself. And unfortunately, it was hijacked by somebody there at the very end. But your thoughts on the day as a whole in music yesterday.
Well, listen, I mean, there's always going to be people who, you know, are going to thumb their nose at something like a Super Bowl halftime show, right? Like, but you can't beat a dog for being a dog. I mean, a Super Bowl halftime show at this point, it has to be spectacle. It has to be this grandiose, larger than life, almost ridiculous, sort of surreal jumble of pop. Anything less would just seem like it was lacking a pulse. And so in that context, I think Madonna did a phenomenal job. You know, there were some people who were like, well, she's obviously not really singing, or she's really, I just don't know that that's the point of the halftime show. You know, you could probably go to a club near the Super Bowl and go find some really good, you know, organic singers. I just think the point of the Super Bowl halftime show is to entertain. And watching what Madonna did, and LMFAO, and, you know, MIA until she decided to go rogue, you know, Nicki Minaj, I just thought it was really entertaining. You know, my crack was when the whole thing started and there were like, you know, 1,000 sort of half-naked, sweaty gladiators pulling Madonna out. I felt like, you know, 1,000 sweaty gladiators was the one thing that both football fans and Madonna fans could probably agree on were a good thing.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But
damn it, I think it really bothered me, though.
Well, yeah, and I saw that on Twitter, and I think it bothered a lot of people because I think a lot of people have the same pet peeve that I do. And that's like when somebody takes something and makes it about themselves. What right does anybody have, particularly if you're not the featured performer in the first place? I mean, the featured performer shouldn't be doing that. But if you're just one of the supporting acts, what right do you have to hijack the thing and make it about yourself?
Well, that's the thing. It's like if you don't want to be there on that stage, then just say no. But to crassly and, like, you know, in such a juvenile fashion sort of commandeer the spotlight in the way that MIA did, I just think it's so graceless and so transparent, you know. Like I said, you don't have to be there on that stage. You know, Madonna graciously extended an offer to MIA to be part of this, and Madonna graciously extended an offer for her to benefit because, you know, she has her own single, MIA has her own single to promote. And, you know, rather than just being happy that she would have benefited enormously regardless. Right? She was on the biggest stage in the world, and then there was no doubt going to be a lot of people who decided to, like, Google who that person was because they probably, you know, pop fans are going to know Nicki Minaj. They're less likely to know MIA.
Right.
And now I think, you know, the impression that a lot of people are going to have of her is just of being a spoiled, opportunistic brat. I just don't, you know, I mean, it's like there's so many things wrong with what she did. If you want to make a statement to the man, there's probably better places to do it. If you want to make a statement to the man, I would like to see at least a little innovation and creativity. Right. If you're such an artist, I have nothing good to say about it. I was really, really disappointed by it, you know, and it's not about, there were some people who were like, well, what's the big deal? America's so repressed, it's just a middle finger. To me, that's completely beside the point, right? Like, because you know when you stick up the middle finger at the Super Bowl that it's going to create a shitstorm, pardon my French, of like scrutiny. And there are going to be all these kind of right-wing groups that are like, oh, see, this is blah, 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 and it's going to create all this controversy. You know it's going to do that. So it's not a question of whether I agree or I disagree with people who are offended by it. I'm not personally offended by it. I'm offended by the lack of creativity and the lack of sense of place. Yeah,
it was hacky, actually, and
it was hacky. It was completely hacky, and it was just like, come on, you know. Anyway, that was I should probably stop.
No. I mean, those are interesting thoughts there, but I'm more interested even than that because we're talking about something that's really kind of a hackneyed thing, and looking at these Super Bowl halftime shows, as you said, they're formulaic and everything. To me, the more interesting story, and to get your thoughts on, is you look at the last 8 years, and outside of the Black Eyed Peas last year, it's been mostly the nostalgia acts. It's very interesting that Madonna could now graduate to being considered kind of a safe act by the NFL, but I guess she's at that point there. But I look at the bigger issue of this thing, Bill, and when you and I were growing up, if you were going to have, and again, it wasn't these big, rock or pop acts playing the Super Bowl back then, obviously, but if you were going to have somebody out there on the biggest stage in the world, I mean, mid-'80s, Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, Springsteen, Duran Duran, maybe even Huey Lewis in the News. I mean, you had your pick. It seems to me today, 8 years of only the Black Eyed Peas, I don't see a backlog. And I go back to 2 years ago on the show. We had a little powwow on the show with some music industry executives just looking at trends, and one of them said to me something like, I'm concerned that we're not creating any more Rolling Stones, than that we may not be. I mean, the backlog as I see it, maybe Kelly Clarkson, who ironically did the national anthem yesterday, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, but isn't the bigger issue in all of this, I mean, who these days, because of the fragmentation and everything else, who's big enough to play the Super Bowl out of today's artists?
Yeah, I think that it's a valid point. I mean, my friends and I, or people in the business and I have discussed before this notion of, who's emerged post, 1990 that is either on a trajectory or cleared the stadium levels, or certainly even just arena levels. And I think, there's a couple of acts from country that often get overlooked. A guy like Kenny Chesney can sell out stadiums and certainly sell out arenas. Almost, at whim. There's other bands that will surprise people that are older acts, but like a band like Bon Jovi, I think last year put on 99 shows and sold out 99 shows. So they take that notion of seeing a million faces and rocking them all very seriously. But yeah, I mean, in terms of newer acts, I mean, I think in the newer generation, you're looking at maybe Justin Timberlake, who doesn't really style himself as a musician anymore. Maybe an Alicia Keys has emerged as a real, kind of long-term career talent. But it's a valid point. I mean, there's not a ton of these acts.
That to me is fascinating. That's one of the most interesting things I think that anybody could talk about as far as the music industry, the landscape that we've seen over the last decade plus and going into the future. Because you've got the Grammys in a couple weeks here, but again, there's no real earth-shattering storylines that I can see that are surrounding that. I mean, like you said, there's the country guys, but it's not like all of America has their songs in their head the way that the biggest sellers of days gone by used to be. Like when we were growing up, and I was joking when we did the roundtable with the executives, I said, somebody like me, I would have given anything to be able to wall off Howard Jones back in the day. I couldn't get away from it, but like today I can. Today you can wall yourself off from the stuff you don't like. Lady Gaga and Katy Perry. There's only a few real broad, mass-produced type superstars these days. I mean, is there anything you see coming along that might change that, or do you think it's just a permanent thing?
Let me just say one thing, which is that, I mean, this kind of goes back to our SoundScan conversation. Maybe the perception was these acts were for all of America, but the reality was never that any of these acts were for all of America, right?
Sure, but
and that's what SoundScan revealed.
You know how it was. The stations used to blur and play a bunch of stuff.
But I guess more to the point, it's a very there's a couple competing trends I think happening right here. I think number one, it's the age of a lot of niche, right? Okay. There's so much competition for attention, and it feels very much to me like even if you're able to cut through, and even if you're able to have a few hit songs, it's no guarantee that people are going to pay attention next time around.
Right.
So it's very difficult to build that kind of a fan base because I think people have come to view music almost as a channel where, I want, like think about Pandora, right? Pandora might see this differently. Pandora might say, well, we encourage people to discover new artists. And for some folks, I'm sure they do. But kind of Pandora also certainly enables a lazier kind of listening where you're just like, I'm in the mood to listen to music that kind of sounds like this, and you hit play, and then here comes a stream of music that kind of sounds like this, and you don't have to learn any of those artists because tomorrow if you're in the mood for that stream of music, you can launch it again. If you're in the mood for a slightly different stream of music, you can launch that stream too. And I think it kind of depersonalizes a little bit, this age of let's check everything out, but let's not get close to anything necessarily.
Well, that's really interesting, Bill, because I see this being kind of full circle in our little conversation here. We started off talking about Don Cornelius and Soul Train. The fact that you don't have any kind of unifying force like that, Friday night videos, or MTV back when they actually cared about playing music videos, and terrestrial radio's kind of fallen on hard times. Is it just this thing where we don't have the mechanisms to make things so broad that they can transcend the niche anymore?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's it. I mean, I think, 25 years ago, there were, 10 or 12 platforms that really mattered to exposing music. Mm-hmm. And today, we do an annual issue. We've done it for the last 4 or 5 years called Maximum Exposure. It's the 100 most important places to expose your music. And sort of inherent in that observation is just that there are so many places to discover new music these days, whether it's, streaming radio destinations, on-demand streaming services, all the different, the proliferation of blogs and websites. You can go to AOL Music, you can go to Yahoo Music, you can go to Rolling Stone, you can go to Billboard.com, you can go to, there's almost no end to the TV networks, TV shows, print magazines, online magazines, blogs. There's so many different places you can go to learn about music. And I think it ultimately devalues all of them, in the sense that I don't think there is, this one place anymore, that matters. It used to be that, like, the cover of Rolling Stone was like the be all end all. And I think it still holds a magical place. Don't get me wrong. I think it holds a magical place for a lot of people, a lot of artists especially. But is getting the cover of Rolling Stone magazine going to, like, make your career? Is it going to sell you 1 million records? Is it going to do anything like that? Like, it isn't. And that's not a diss on Rolling Stone. I mean, I read Rolling Stone. I love that publication, but it's just the reality that people are so scattered in where they get their information these days about music.
I agree with that completely, Bill. It's just a reflection of where somebody's already at. It seems like if they're on Rolling Stone, and it'll help their career, but it's not gonna make it like it would have at one point. Because like you said, very few platforms really have the ability to make anything anymore. Well, as we go along into the future, I guess last question I've got for you, as much talk as there's been in the last year or two about cloud technology and everything else, and clearly at Billboard you're having to stay on top of all of these trends. As we migrate towards a world where maybe it gets to be a dominant position in the next couple of years, that people don't even really have physical units of music in their hands here, how do you see that impacting things and the development of future artists?
Well, I think it'll be longer than a few years before people don't have a physical product in their hand.
Okay.
For starters, I think that there's some older generations that don't really want to make the switch. There's still a lot of CDs sold in this country. So, and I think that that's fine. Is it going to drop? I mean, for most labels, are CDs now responsible for, 35-40% of the recorded music revenues, as opposed to, relatively recently 80-90% of the recorded music revenues? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to drop every year? Yeah, I think so. But, for the last, 5-6 years, it was dropping 15 to 20% a year, basically. And then this year it was, I'm not going to name an exact number, but the drop-off substantially leveled, right?
Okay.
So I think you're starting to get to a point where it will definitely continue to drop, but I think there's going to be a core of CD users for some time anyway. The thing to watch on that front, by the way, is Walmart, Target, and Best Buy, and how quickly they continue to shrink their floor space for CD sales. Because right now those three companies are selling the absolute overwhelming lion's share of CDs that get sold in this country at all.
Okay.
If you think about it, there's no place else to buy CDs these days.
That's true.
So, it makes sense that would be the case. I mean, in terms of what it means for artists moving forward, I mean, I think when I look at the next generation of artists that are emerging, whether it's, a guy like Skrillex, who's up for Best New Artist this year, and, certainly isn't a household name to some folks, but is absolutely a household name to others, younger kids and fans of dance music, electronic music. I think the internet presents a whole new set of opportunities. There's bands. I was actually looking. We're about to launch a streaming music chart at Billboard, and I was looking at the results over the last few weeks, and it's interesting to see that there's certain bands that are in the top 10 or top 15, Avicii, M83, Skrillex, I'm getting down to 15, 20 now, but there's certain acts that are in the top 20 there, that wouldn't be in the top 20 if you just went by sort of radio play and digital downloads.
Sure.
And so, it is a little bit of a different space. And I think people are, once you've paid a subscription or once you have an all-you-can-eat kind of entree, I think people are more willing to experiment with music. And so, I know I use Spotify, for example, all the time just to check something out because, I expect it to be there and I don't have to pay for it. So I'll hear a little buzz about this or a little buzz about that, and I can pop online and see what I think. So I think it's good in that regard. I think it's good for music discovery. I think it's good. The downside, if you're a new artist, is just there's so much music that you can discover, and so you're kind of back to the problem of breaking through.
Well, it is very difficult to navigate everything that's out there, and that's why big fans of music have always relied on Billboard magazine and really enjoy following everything you're doing there, Bill, as editorial director of Billboard magazine, billboard.com, and of course at Werde, BWERDE on Twitter. Bill, thank you so much for coming on. It was a great conversation. I knew it would be. I'd love to do it again with you sometime, sir.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The great Bill Werde from Billboard magazine, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. FDH Lounge, mini episode number 78.